All right, class, say your name and where you're from. I remember hearing that prompt all the time, over and over again when I was a kid. And every time it came up, I got incredibly nervous because I would have to reveal one, my name, one that is not American, not English, or at least the second part of it. And then two, I'd have to reveal that I was an immigrant from another country. My name is Monica Mutale Bwalya. If you ask my family or anyone from my country or region of Africa, they will scream and tell you that that is absolutely not how it's pronounced and that I'm saying my own name incorrectly. That's the best I can do considering the situation. I was born in a small country called Zambia. It is in southern Central Africa, right underneath the Democratic Republic of Congo and right on top of Zimbabwe and Botswana. To be specific, I was born in the capital, Lusaka. I grew up in a home filled with multiple languages. I grew up speaking Bemba, my native language, the language of my tribe, Nyanja, because that is the primary language spoken in Lusaka or the southern portion of Zambia. And I also grew up speaking English. English is a language that was bestowed upon myself and my people due to colonialism. Languages are a big part of my life, a big part of my cultural and linguistic story. The tiny, tiny house that my grandmother and her 11 or 12, 13 grandchildren lived in was filled with these three languages, probably even more because my grandmother spoke two other languages. These three languages lived in our home. They occupied our kitchen. They existed in our laughter and in the rhythm of my mother and my grandmother's voices. Around the time that I was 4 or 5, 2001, things began to change. Things changed for me. One day, these languages slowly started to disappear. I grew up speaking these three languages fluently. My mother once told me that I spoke the most beautiful, sweetest Nyanja that she had ever heard. All of that changed in December 2001 when we immigrated to the United States for a better life. Those three languages slowly began to disappear and to transmute into something that made living in a new country much easier. Part one, my language story. We moved to the United States when I was very young, about 4 or 5. I was never labeled an ESOL student, but I was very much so what would be called an emergent bilingual or a bilingual speaker. Now we say multilingual. At the time, I didn't know such a thing existed. I didn't even have the words for it. At home, I lived with my mother, her uncle, and his wife, and his wife's extended family. There were about maybe 5 or 6 of us living in a small 2 bedroom apartment. At home, the sounds of Zambia lived on. When I would go outside and I would go to school, I was in the United States. When I went back home, I was very much so still in Zambia. I had to learn how to adapt and code switch and become different people in and outside of the home. I had to learn what was acceptable and what wasn't, how to sound right, how to blend in, how to avoid being noticed for the wrong reasons. In Garcia's book, Educating Emergent Bilinguals, they talk about how students like me become invisible when their multilingualism is ignored due to outdated beliefs about what it means to be multilingual. Part three, performance and loss. When it comes to the languages that compose my identity, Bemba, Nyanja, and English, I ended up losing 2 out of 3. And the 2 out of 3 that were the most important. It didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly but surely. My ability to speak Bemba and Nyanja because my family was trying to get me to assimilate to American culture. Despite the fact that I knew English already, they wanted me to have an American accent. At home, I was spoken to in Bemba and Nyanja 24/7, but I was never required to speak back. And that's where the problem started. I now know that what I am is called a receptive bilingual, and that a receptive bilingual is one that has the ability to understand a language but is not able to speak it fluently. I've learned that that is a valid form of bilingualism that deserves acknowledgement and is honestly something that feels quite affirming to me. From the time that I was a little girl, I have always been told that I have an amazing speaking voice and that I am eloquent and well spoken and that people enjoy listening to me. It's hard to believe, but that's what people tell me. And some could argue that my strong English speaking skills are due to my family encouraging me to speak as much English as possible at home. But I would disagree with that. I would completely disagree with that. Just because someone has an accent doesn't mean that they do not speak well or they do not speak English or any other language well. Accents are beautiful and they paint a diverse picture of people. I was praised for having good English, as people say. The price of that good English was erasure and feeling disconnected from my culture and my people. In Anzaldúa's Borderlands, La Frontera, she calls this type of feeling linguistic terrorism. The violence of being forced to choose between your languages and your survival. That's how myself and many other multilingual speakers have to exist in English dominant spaces. We have to learn English and learn a very specific type of formal academic proper English to survive, or else we are deemed unworthy and denied opportunities. This feeling of erasure and disconnectedness is also related to love's we want to do more than survive. It's related to a specific concept Love talks about that is called spirit murder, the sanctioned harm done to students when their cultures and identities are dismissed. I was in some ways spirit murdered as a child. I had to perform to be accepted. I had to deny myself to exist in the educational survival complex. I had to erase or devalue so many parts of myself linguistically and culturally so that I could survive educational survival complex. Part three, silence as safety. I remember having classmates who spoke standard English, African American Vernacular English, AAVE, Spanish, Spanglish, or some would call Chicano English, Chicano Spanish. When I witnessed students who spoke AAVE or Spanish or Chicano English, they were often mocked, corrected, or punished. As a student, I saw those who were similar to me, who looked like me, who had similar backgrounds to me, get mocked, corrected, and punished just for speaking their languages, being themselves, getting treated poorly for speaking AAVE or Spanish, even though I wasn't affected by that because I spoke quote unquote good English. I was still harmed by proxy. I was harmed in some ways because students reflected parts of myself and because it was awful to see them be treated differently over what I deemed something very trivial, speaking this formal, academic, fancy English. When I saw that, it made me feel awful. It still makes me feel awful. I was treated better, not because I was smarter or because I deserved it, but because I essentially learned how to pass because I spoke good English. Students like me who spoke AAVE or Spanglish or Spanish, they were treated unfairly because they couldn't pass, because they couldn't switch registers. Despite the fact that I was praised for speaking formal academic English, I never felt better than my classmates who didn't. In fact, it made me feel worse. It made me feel bad in some type of way, even though I couldn't properly articulate it. Parts of me shrank because of that. Probably because even though I didn't have the language for it at the time, I knew that students who spoke differently deserved to be treated better, and they were, in fact, more similar to me than others. In Zamora's memoir, Solito, he writes about learning to survive by becoming silent. I relate to that. During Zamora's journey as an unaccompanied minor migrating through El Salvador to the United States, he at times felt so lonely and so disconnected being away from his family and his community that he became silent. He stopped talking to protect himself. That was me trying my best to not be loud, to not be different, to not ask for things, to just be invisible, to protect myself as an immigrant. Part 4, Reclamation. It's only now that I've gotten older and that I have become an educator to multilingual students that I am able to reflect on my experiences and see how and why these things impacted me. I can see in my students how they might feel like they have to leave parts of themselves at home to survive in school. As an ESOL teacher, I now think about these things. I think about how some of my students have to, one, take on the challenge of having to learn a new language, English, specifically academic English, to acclimate to a new country with new cultural expectations. And I think about how they might feel like parts of themselves have been left behind in their country, in their homes, and in their hearts because they're trying to survive at school. I think about how they might have anxiety, apprehension, or fear about coming into my classroom. That makes me feel terrible, but it also inspires me to be the person that I needed when I was a student, to make them feel valued, to highlight their linguistic and cultural identities and incorporate all parts of themselves into the classroom, into their speaking, into their language learning process. I want to be the kind of teacher who sees their full story, not if they just speak good English. I want to build a classroom where language is not something to erase, but something to expand. Calling back to Love's We Want to Do More Than Survive. Education should not just be about compliance. It's about healing, joy, and liberation. I want my classroom to be a site where that happens. So I'm still learning Bemba. Hopefully, I'll learn Nyanja as well. I'm still learning how to be fully myself and to no longer carry shame about who I am, where I come from, and the languages that I speak. My voice sounds like many places and many memories. It is uniquely my own, and I want my students to know that their voices are enough too.